Today we're joined by Paul Black, Head of Business Events for London and Partners. Those of you who don't know, London and Partners is the department of the Mayor's Office for London for marketing and promoting London. And we have two of L&P's partners, Rhiannon from Westminster Central Hall and Stijn from Hilton Hotels, to share and discuss primarily what London has been doing and is doing to be ready for live events and for the return of live. So please use your chat box to add comments, ask questions. I'll pick up on those. But to get the ball rolling, Paul, what have you been doing for the last 12 months?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is okay. And yeah, it's been a really tough year for all of us. I think really the purpose of today is just to give you that very broad outline in terms of, what London has been trying to do during the last months, importantly now, obviously subject to the government guidelines in terms of how we come out of lockdown, what key areas that will look like. And that's both on a very broad perspective in terms of key themes, so notably things like sustainability and mobility of people, but also, specifically for our industry, how our partners have been adapting, getting ready for the reopening. So really appreciate the opportunity, Priya and Richard, this morning. So thanks so much for having me. So to sort of crack on first out, and I hope you can see my screen all okay. So really it's the London recovery and what key areas that looks like. And again, this is very broad stroke what that would include. But firstly, obviously a really key area, because it all encapsulates about building confidence, and there's no magic bullet with confidence, and it's going to take a few knocks to get back to where we were, which realistically that's not going to be for a good 12 to 18 months. But specifically about transport, so TfL, for example, they've created a really enhanced cleaning regime across all their tube stations, bus stations, where they started using long-lasting antiviral disinfectant with much more frequent cleaning. They've created 1,000 hand sanitizers, as you'd expect, across various bits. And a new thing that they've created last quarter, for example, is starting to have ultraviolet light on certain handrails. So that can, well, not completely, but eliminate some viruses as the handrail passes that transition at the top of each escalator. So that exists in around a quarter of tube stations across the city. So there's obviously TfL, there's a big need there to encourage people to use transport, providing first and foremost, of course, that it's safe. The London Green New Deal. So again, there's going to be a lot of sound points that come out of government and city halls across the country on this, particularly because in the context of COP26 in Glasgow later this year. But London has a Green New Deal, which I'll talk a bit about later, on exactly what that means and what implication that could have for London and our industry. Sector resilience is a fancy term for basically saying, in terms of recovery, obviously there'll be a lot of focus on those high growth sectors that will likely recover quicker and better, which obviously has big implications and crossover in terms of employment. So that is things like SaaS, for example, fintech, gaming and esports, e-commerce, retail tech, clean tech. These industries are really growing in London and they've been pretty robust during this period. So as an inward investment agency, which London and Partners is alongside a convention bureau, obviously our business lot will be focusing a lot on those kind of sectors to try and encourage them to land. And often the events industry, of course, plays such a fundamental role as that first kind of landing platform. Hospitality, I mean, we're all event nuts, right? So we all, are so proud to work in this industry of how resilient it has been, on every side of the chain. And with the hospitality investment, our hotels and venues have done a great job in terms of how they're preparing for reopening with the health and safety and COVID secure venues. So Hilton, Stijn and Rhiannon will give much better information on that. But in London, there's been a lot of work on that, as there have been everywhere across the UK. A big thing that we're just actually mentioning before this is the West End animation. So a big thing as we sort of recover and is, some businesses have sadly closed during this period in the West End, some retail outlets. So there will be a big work to reanimate that West End city. So it's collaboration, how best to use that space, take into consideration the needs of those communities, the occupiers, the different consumers now, because that will have changed during this period. So, look out for that, because that is going to come during the next coming months. And that's kind of really starting in earnest with this return to al fresco, where in Westminster, between April and September, they'll be closing a lot of streets to allow people to dine in outdoor settings in various spots. And again, this is all about confidence building, making people feel safe, because like I say, there's no magic bullet to going straight back to how it was before. Excuse me.
Paul, I should just check your little cough there. Can you tell me a little bit more about this COP26? What is it?
So COP26. Yeah, sure. Sorry, excuse me for saying an acronym.
That's okay, no problem.
I hate myself when I say acronyms. So with COPs, that's basically where all nation states will come back together to basically update on whether they've been hitting the targets that were agreed at the Paris Climate Agreement. It's hugely significant because the kind of overarching agreement at the Paris Agreement was that everyone would be net zero by 2050. Obviously, with the Biden administration coming in, that may be more possible. The UK government committed to that last year. London had an environmental policy in 2018. So it is a very, very significant conference based on that. And that would have existed regardless of COVID, because it was initially meant to take place last November. So it's called Conference of the Parties, but it's basically all nation states coming together and basically recommitting. So I think it's going to be quite profound, because every destination is talking about this green recovery, this environmentally sustainable recovery.
Yeah, I agree, and it's a key initiative of ours at the EMA of what can we do for sustainability within the events industry. We have a working group working on that now, which is great. In fact, we have a webinar that we sort of help push, which is across industry, across associations, which Paul at M&IT magazine is going to be hosting in a couple of weeks, next week as a matter of fact.
Yeah, great. And it's really good that, because as an industry, we need practical insight how we can then absolutely support it and be part of that solution. But I think, a big thing again that will come out, and the mayor announced this, and he funds us. So this came out a couple of weeks ago about the city recovery, and that's obviously all about safety and the slow full reopening of London. And that's, again, all about building consumer confidence to enable retail, hospitality, to the sectors to get back to business. It's key themes focusing on cleaning, building that business confidence, public health. Obviously, it needs to be efficient. It needs to be communicated very clearly, very simply. And, that crosses every level from, you and I as individuals all traveling into London on a decision to get on transport, to going into the office, to going to the restaurant, to going to a business meeting. So again, it encapsulates every key bit. So look out for that, because that is coming formally soon. So just to quickly touch on that safety thing. So shout out to Visit Britain and Jamie, I think, who's online today. But We're Good to Go's had really strong pickup in locations across London. And really importantly as well, for our international reputation, it's been endorsed by the WTTC. So that's significant, because the WTTC has a global reputation as a tourism industry association. So that's good. AIM Secure, again, has a lot of venues that have signed up. It's basically the MIA accreditation, where really it has venues upholding legal compliance, as well as health and safety hygiene controls. But all this sort of encapsulates, and again, I hope the venues, Hilton have done an amazing job, and so hence Central Westminster, they can give you that practical insight in terms of how they're preparing for reopening on that. But it's all about, if social distancing still needs to be applied, it's that signage, the clean communication, reducing those touch points, and making sure that there's regular sanitization stations across the venue.
It is early.
Yeah, I know. God, I should have had espresso for that. So then moving on to hybrid. So obviously hybrid is a huge topic, something that's existed in our industry for years, but really come to the fore in the last 12 months as a solution to, get some level of live event. And I think this whole messaging around hybrid has evolved enormously in the last 6 months alone. So, EMA and us, we did a great event at Royal Lancaster in October. And even since then, I feel it's evolved quite considerably. And it's complicated for buyers because everyone's at different levels. Everyone has different options available. So in one sense, you have these established studios to essentially plug and play. So people like, yes, the Royal Lancaster, or some of these other hotels that have green screens available. So people like Kimpton Fitzroy, the Marriott Grosvenor Square, all the way to the most advanced venues like Tobacco Dock, who have got a built-in digital tech system which you can just again play with. So it's basically creating a virtual venue of Tobacco Dock alongside the live element. You also have venues that have in-house broadcasting teams. So like the IET, the Institute of Electronics and Technology, King's Place events, they have all of that in-house for you. But a really key bit, which is really important, and again, that's working on different pricing patterns, are those venues that have that really deep partnerships with production companies, which again, Hilton and Central Westminster can talk more to. But from a destination point of view, and when we talk about London, for us, Hybrid really must focus on why organisers should choose London as the live element, with the infrastructure to broadcast as that kind of reassurance piece that it is available, and most importantly, it is affordable. So, and what I mean by that is it's encouraging your members and sort of businesses all around the world that, if you're going to choose one location in Europe in which to broadcast your event, choose London, because you get access to these speakers, good sponsors, investors. And it really comes back to that messaging, which always existed, but I think we have to be a lot more explicit, because with any event, whether it's virtual, live or hybrid, it's all about content in which to engage each audiences. So you'll see with a lot of venues as well, they have created hybrid packages, again, to make it hopefully a bit more simple. I hope you don't mind, but I've just added this because I think this is a really positive point to what's happened, because again, it's been a really difficult year for our industry, but the industry hasn't stopped and London hasn't stopped. And Stijn, again, will talk about the Metropole. This has had a fantastic refurbishment during the last year. So we're really excited to see that. We're actually doing a piece with Neil in a couple of weeks on that, so I'll send it over because it's really exciting and a fantastic refurbishment for the Metropole. But there's other hotels as well, like the Jumeirah, Park Plaza Homes, Marriott Grosvenor Square. They've all had quite considerable refurbishment, so look out for that. With great options, for potentially your groups. There's also new hotels from established brands. So, for example, the Londoner, that's going to be a great opening this year, which has obviously been slightly delayed because of COVID. You've also got the Nobu Portman Square, which looks very cool and chic, somewhere I'd look completely out of place in. But
it's the old Churchill, isn't it?
It is, yes. It's a very cool. It's close to the Churchill, but it's a very, very cool brand, and they've got a great restaurant.
Very well positioned property.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then you've got new brands as well, which again is encouraging for London, that they still look at London. Things like Mondrian, Shoreditch, Pan Pacific, and the Nomad. Olympia, again, look out for that, because that's said again huge, over £1 billion redevelopment on things such as our house cinema, restaurants, shops, two new hotels. So again, that's going to be a kind of mini convention and cultural complex, which will be hopefully ready in 2023 with further announcements coming in July. So look out for that. And then really important, like we say, as we touched on the start, is this green recovery. So, and this is all in the context of COP and also things such as London Climate Action Week, which will be its third year this year at the end of June. But the city environmental plan, that really focused on sort of key things which is from 2018 in London, things such as air quality, green infrastructure, adapting to climate change, ambient noise and circular economy. But, with all these fancy buzzwords, what does that mean? The core principle was about zero carbon 2050. So it's basically decarbonising the energy grid across buildings, across transport, above with every consumer choice. So it's investing in clean energy, it's retrofeeding buildings with renewable energy, as well as better heat sources, and it's increasing that overall green cover within the city. Then, last year, the mayor, he announced this Green New Deal, which basically short-term means there'll be a lot of movement and investment to create more green jobs. So they're looking to double that in the next 10 years. So currently it's around 190,000 people in London. They want to double that by 2030. He's also mentioned that he wants London to be zero carbon by 2030, which is incredibly ambitious. And then really, we're just seeing how that unveils, because we're coming into election year as well for the mayor. And just to clarify, we do sit separately from the mayor's office, so we're not a political body, we're a promotional agency essentially. But so he has mentioned that in some of his news reports. So again, it's going to be interesting to see how that unveils. But again, what does that look like? And I think we can say all these fancy terms, but what does that look like for the delegate, for the individual, for the consumer, for the worker? And it's fewer cars, it's more electrical vehicles, it's more pedestrian space. You would have seen the street space that TfL have really pushed during this period. It's much more dedicated bus lanes and cycle lanes. It's water fountains on every street. It's many more recycling hubs across. It's giving people the solutions to encourage them to make better individual decisions. It's having odd shaped buildings across London, which is used to store energy. It's much more cover from solar panels. But again, we talk about environmental sustainability, and the important piece is always to say is it has to be affordable, it has to be fair, it has to be accessible, and it has to be convenient in which to effectuate behavioural change. So really important to address that. But you'll see with those stats on that slide, there's obviously big targets, particularly with our transport, which is obviously has a huge impact on carbon emissions. So things such as targets for tube going zero emissions, hopefully by 2030, the bus fleet by 2037. But I think that'll be a lot before that, because it's advanced considerably in the last 2-3 years. In fact, in central London, they're all hybrid or emission free now already. And then obviously the waste is a big part. So, London's not unique in this. Every city is planning for this green, resilient, sustained recovery. UK has an enormous opportunity this year in terms of reputationally hosting what will hopefully be a big change of mindset globally with regards to environmental sustainability and sustainability more broadly, which I know EMA are working a lot on. So yeah, fingers crossed this will be an encouraging year for the UK.
Yeah, just to jump in there, Paul, I mean, I think, it's great that governments come together and talk about, this big initiative and the big drive. It's great that then cities pick up on this and start to focus on what their areas of responsibility are to help drive this change. And, my message to everybody out there is that, those cities, those governments can't do that without your company making commitments. Now, a lot of our members are from major global organizations, and those companies have made commitment to look at things and do things and change things. What we're now talking about with the EMA is how that cascades down to then different people, different departments, different, as individuals, as event managers that we're doing, we have to be looking about what, we can do to support the bigger picture. And that's where I think, from a sustainability point of view, we're very much all coming through. So yeah,
and I think this may be completely wrong, so do correct me, but what I would guess would happen would be, as the UK widely, either government or one of the various bodies involved will ask businesses to commit to, whether it's net zero or something along those lines, just because that will be the lead up to COP, because obviously it's got to talk the talk ready to host what is the biggest environmental conference really that's since ever Paris, been. Yeah, since Paris. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's a really important thing. This, as lots of people now start to say, is this isn't a rehearsal. There's one planet, and it's ours. It's our grandchildren's and our great grandchildren's and everything else. So great. Thank you so much for that, Paul. I see there's a question in the chat about, can we get copies of those slides to share, which I'm sure we can. And also, Paul, you very kindly did a few months ago a document that talked about, the venues that have your partners that have done already for hybrid, all this, that, and the other. And I asked you, I think we have talked about this. Are you going to do it? Can you do an update on that for us, so that we can circulate that and share that in the next few weeks?
Thanks for reminding me. I was meant to say that. Yes, we're just updating because we've got 5 more venues. We're just adding to that. And also, if of interest, I can send you a link, which is a complete different thing, but venues that have adapted their outdoor space. So certainly this summer, there's good options there available across, which hopefully encourage people to bring people together safely. But yeah, I'll share both. So yeah, thanks for the reminder. I will talk that afterwards. Thank you.
Okay, so let's delve down now a bit more into the practical from a venue point of view. So Rhiannon, you are a London and Partners partner, and from our chat the other day, I know that you guys are doing a lot to get Westminster Central Hall ready to come back to live. You've got, you're right at the heart of Westminster. You're still across from government. So yeah, tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing and how you're seeing it.
Great, thanks. Good morning, everyone. So for people that don't know Central Hall Westminster, unfortunately, some people still don't. It is a historic and unique Grade 2 star listed building. It's quite big. It has 25 different rooms where you can have meetings for 12 people up to 2,000 people in the Great Hall. A lot of people know the Great Hall for a lot of big televised events. So we host the New Year's Eve Big Ben Bash normally. Obviously last year there was no fireworks, so we couldn't do that. And then big broadcasts like the Late Late Show with James Corden. We did the UK tour year on year. Stand Up to Cancer, and also FIFA Interactive World Gaming. So that was back in 2017, one of the biggest kind of live streamed EA Sports events that we've held as well. It's a great venue with lots of different markets and different types of events that we hold as well. And also as a working Methodist church. So we wear many different hats. We do concerts, graduations, but our main focus is the big kind of multi-day conferences and meetings as well. And we're also very well known for being a sustainable venue. We've worked really hard for many years now to try and reduce carbon emissions year on year. We were also the first UK venue to launch the carbon calculator, where you can carbon offset your event, your meeting as well, by planting trees. And we've been zero to landfill, cut plastic, also, committed to the net zero 2050, which meant that we've completely looked at our supply chain, and just before lockdown actually changed our caterers and changed our cleaners as well to make sure that we had everyone on board with the same values. So after the first lockdown, the main quick reaction was really from our facilities team. They got to finally do a lot of the renovation work that they wanted to do. Obviously, as a busy venue, it's always really a big tug of war for space and time for them. So they managed to recarpet the lecture hall and library, which is a really big space, uniformed all of the meeting rooms, put ventilation systems into all of the ones that didn't already have them, did paint work and you name it, lots of different things that needed to be done, which was a really great start. And it means that the venue looks better than ever. So we're really excited to be able to show it off soon. And then obviously we were looking at what we needed to do to comply with the safe and secure, also looking at social distancing. So being able to have capacity charts that were based on 2 meter social distancing at first, then reduced down to 1 meter social distancing with all the different layouts and all eventualities planned for, just because we don't know what kind of inquiries we were going to get and what the restrictions were going to be. So that meant that, even though the Great Hall normally takes 2,000 people, it was still at full capacity for 1 meter social distancing, taking 423 people, which is still a nice healthy number for a conference and also for a hybrid conference as well. And some of the smaller meeting rooms also had nice healthy numbers, even with the social distancing in place, which is really good. At the moment, I'm obviously seeing, with 2022 and beyond, people aren't necessarily looking for social distancing, but it's really good for people to know that it's there just in case something changes and they do want to go hybrid as well. We also did zonal pricing. So it meant that we could break up different floors of the building and have dedicated entrances and exits, so that if we've got multiple different events in the venue, they're not actually crossing paths. And that meant that we were looking at our pricing structure to make sure that we could facilitate that as well. Then looking at catering, obviously there was a lot of concern about kind of buffet style catering, about contamination. So our great new partners, Green and Fortune, put together a safe and secure menu based on kind of bento boxes that you take away, and still making sure that you weren't using ridiculous plastic and things that we just are not in line with our sustainable values. Was really important. So we've got 2 different menus now for all eventualities. And then the big one, of course, is AV. So we've worked with our AV team, White Light, for the last 5 years. They are based with us in the venue, and they've invested £2 million into the venue when they started as well. So they know the venue really well. They're everything from kind of normal event production to hybrid as well. And the great thing that I've had, because I absolutely hate trying to sell tech, is being able to talk to them about what hybrid means. You know, hybrid is seen as a buzzword. It does mean lots of different things. I'm learning that live streaming has so many different options. So I've heard the phrase, how long is a piece of string, quite a few times. But yeah, so it was really a case of, you know, understanding what clients want, going away and asking the right questions. And a lot of people are still learning themselves as well. So that's been interesting. What we have decided to do, because we have got the small syndicate rooms that take 12 people, and we've got the smaller rooms that take up to 60 as well, is have 2 of those rooms fitted with cameras where you have just an easy plug in and go live stream. And that's going to be put in before September, I believe. And then we're also looking at potentially, if there is need for it, looking at the larger rooms as well. Because it's grade 2 listed, we wouldn't ever kind of just build anything and keep it there, because we have so many different types of events as well. It probably shoot us in the foot a little bit. But yeah, so that's been good, and we can hopefully kind of talk about that a little bit more when we've got the packages. Contracting, we've obviously had to be a lot more flexible with contracting. That means that we can change things within our financial year free of charge. And a lot of those conversations have been happening, which is great. And then, yeah, at the moment, lots of really positive inquiries. After the government announcement, I had a flurry of inquiries that were all based on awards and celebrations for kind of internal companies. I think that was the main thing, is, you know, especially for this year, when people can get back together to kind of thank each other for everything that's happening, but also looking at some of the really big events, potentially downsizing into a venue like ours as well. And then again, loads of concert inquiries. So it's been quite a mixed bag, but really, really, really positive so far. And also, just to mention last thing, which is going to be announced next week, we've actually taken on another venue in Edinburgh. So yeah, I know, you'll get to know before everyone else. It's called Central. Yeah, so the network of venues is Central Hall Venues. It is another Methodist church. It's smaller. The biggest space would take up to 250 people. And the kind of plan beyond that is to take on different venues around the UK that stick with our values and build the network. So hopefully, if we talk about kind of UK-wide conferencing, you could have lots of people in different CHV venues all kind of streaming into one another. That's the plan.
No, okay, that's great. Thank you. And I mean, certainly, you know, we talk with a number of our members are based up in Scotland, particularly sort of, you know, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen, you know, and connecting events from there to London. I think that again is part of the hybrid, is, you know, sort of terming it the spider's web, where 2, 3, 5 venues are connected. So we'll come back to some questions there I've jotted down, and I can see some stuff coming in the chat. Once I
can definitely keep people updated. I can see.
No, once we have that discussion. But Stijn, let's move to Hilton now. 6,500 hotels around the world. I know your focus is very much UK and Ireland, but I've seen stuff that you guys are writing up on the sustainability thing. You've got this thing called a playbook. Would be good to know, but you know, how are your hotels and properties getting ready to welcome people through their doors and start meetings again?
Well, let me start by saying first, yeah, absolutely. We have, well, I stopped counting, but yeah, roughly about 6,500 hotels across the world. And I think with the amount of hotels that you have also comes an expectation from customers that wherever you go, any Hilton will give you that standard that you're looking for as well. And that's something that, if you go back more or less 12 months, when the pandemic started, that Hilton's really looked at as well. And that started basically from our side with introducing a program that's called Clean Stay. And the Clean Stay part is very much developed around guest experiences, and that starts with our Hilton Honors app, for example, where you have contactless arrivals in the hotels. So there's very limited interaction. And if you really want to, you don't have to see any receptionist by just walking into the hotel, because you've checked in and you use your digital key to access your room from that as well. But what the Clean Stay program has done also as well is touch on those high touch points as well. The things that we, I believe, very often forgot about that we actually touch a lot. Take a remote control in a room, for example, or a doorknob, or these are very simple things that if you go, again, more than 12 months back, nobody really considered, I think, in the beginning. And now all of a sudden we're all very careful about what are we touching as well. And with that, we've introduced Clean Stay, as I said, and that starts with sealing off the room after it's being cleaned. So when a guest actually arrives at the hotel, they break the seal while entering. It means that nobody's been into that room prior or after cleaning as well. It has a significant amount of touch points that are highlighted in the room as well, and they are covered with a Clean Stay branding as well, I would say, from there as well. But outside of the room, it also goes into the food and beverage experiences that you have. Excuse me. And Rhiannon already touched on that as well. You know, what do you do with a buffet, for example, and how do you still make that happen for large groups? And a bento box is a wonderful option there as well. But doing it for 2,000 people might operationally change things as well. So in that aspect, we looked at the Clean Stay, which is an individual traveler, basically on one hand, and with that we involved into Hilton Event Ready. And that really touches upon the attendees' experience from an events point of view, and what happens prior to your arrival, what happens during your stay, from food and beverage facilities to the hybrid options that we have. But equally, how do we also still have responsible events, and how do we have the community impact as well? And so around that, we've introduced the Hilton Playbook. Now, to really go into depth about the playbook as well will take a couple of hours, because it is about 150 pages of information that you can go through. You don't have to really sift through everything as well, but you can really, because it's online and interactive, you can really jump to the part that's relevant to you. So whether that's the food and beverage solutions or the hybrid options, or even the transportation options that have been looked into as well, and how do we work around that. Richard, I also want to say
this playbook is an online tool to help the event planner or the attendee or the guest to look at what Hilton are doing, so they can go online and
absolutely, yeah. So it gives you I'd say very detailed overview of what we've been up to in terms of Clean Stay. So there's an introduction about Clean Stay, there's an introduction about Event Ready, but equally it really runs through that whole attendees experience point of view, but we must not forget the planner's experience as well. And those are obviously in some parts similar, but front and end can also be very different. And feedback, for example, is a very important topic on that part as well. So the playbook itself, I think, is a great tool for someone to get a really good overview of what we've been doing as well. And then you have the Clean Stay and Event Ready side as well. But Richard, you mentioned this morning as well, and I won't name any company names, but about officers returning yes or no, and that 40% might actually stay hybrid or remote. As well. And with that, and I think we've seen that all around the world as well, not just a thing from my side, but I'm sure you've all seen that too and heard about that. Hilton's also introduced Workspaces by Hilton, which basically allows a traveler to book what used to be a bedroom basically, but now is a remote office that they can use as well. So if they would have to come into the office or come into London, for example, but offices are no longer there or have been decreased in capacity for different purposes, for example, that they can use a hotel as an office as well, and they can actually meet people there in a private setting if they wish to too. So I think overall that kind of sums up a couple of initiatives that we've
lots of changes.
To the point of Paul, besides all of that, in London in particular, and also the rest of the UK, we haven't been sitting still. So the Hilton London Metropole is a perfect example. They've gone through a multi-million-pound refurbishment over the last 12 months. They are due to finish very, very soon. And that really, it's not just the event space that they touched upon. They really started from the lobby the food and beverage outlets, to moving the gym to a different location to increase a better flow for the events, for example. And equally, we're still opening hotels as well. So in October this year, we're opening a new Hilton in Woking, for example, with a ballroom capacity of over 400 people. So we are still looking at the future, I think, from a UK and Ireland perspective. And obviously, I'm an optimist, and I see optimism as well, say, returning after the government's announcements as well. And now we need I think the willingness is there, the optimism is there, the confidence obviously is something that needs to come in as well. And I think things like Clean Stay, Event Ready, and also the things like what Rhiannon touched upon, what they're doing at Westminster Hall, for example, all that together contributes to the recovery of the industry and bringing back events. So yeah, that's I think in a nutshell what we've been up to in the last 12 months. There's more to come.
Okay.
And it is ever evolving, and we are introducing hybrid offers, as you said as well. And not just for the UK and Ireland, but also if you want to, as a customer, want to have a hybrid option, but you want to stream from Düsseldorf, Singapore, New York, and London at the same time, then being a global brand like that is something obviously that we've been looking at as well. And these offers are coming out or are live already at the moment. So yeah.
Okay, cool. So you're able to connect a number of your properties through your in-house technology and everything else, because I know that lots of discussions that our members are having is that, you know, to go to hybrid is we've then now got to rent the venue, we've got to put the kit in, we've got to do this, that, the other, and we've also got to have the virtual streaming capability, so the costs are naturally going to suspectively increase. So, and I know that the stuff, that document that Paul's got is some of that shares people that have partnered or made that infrastructural investment. And that leads me very nicely to the sort of the bigger question for all four of us to start this sort of panel discussion is, and it's really hard to look into the future to think, okay, what is this new world going to be like for all of us? How is it going to pan out? It is evolving. It's evolving very, very quickly. But, you know, where do you see the future events? So post, you know, once the restrictions get lifted, what are you guys predicting that the new future will be? There is a question there is, once the restrictions are permitted, you know, what are we going to have in place? Is it, you know, are we going to be just able to open up our ballrooms for 1,000 people? Are you seeing, you know, smaller numbers and online? You know, what, you know, let's have that conversation. What are you guys starting to discuss and predict within your organizations? Who wants to go first on that one? Oh, Paul.
I think when you mentioned going back to 1,000 people conference, for example, I think we all want to. I think that's, if I speak for my own personal opinion, obviously I want to as well. But I think the main topic there is safety, right? And it's the feeling of being safe. And if I look at the conversations that I hear across the hotels, for example, it's safety of guests, but also the safety of team members is the most important thing that you look after, obviously. So I think it's very much depending on the guidelines in place in London and in the rest of the UK as well. But do I see it returning? Absolutely. I do think there's a place for that in the future. But hybrid will be there also on the same side. Yeah.
Yeah. So as an organization, you guys are saying, and I think, you know, guys in the chat, it's really good to give these guys some intel from yourselves, as, you know, if you see it being 100% back to life, 50-50, 70-30, you know, what you as companies are discussing and talking about with your future events, that would be really, really useful for these guys to get some of that intel. I know we have fed some stuff back in the past. But Paul, so how, you know, strategically there must be people talking and meeting from a city point of view, or even you working with the hotels and the venues about, you know, what the future looks like. What are they predicting?
The honest answer, yeah, it's very difficult, you know, because some hotels won't open in May, some venues won't, and there'll be a staggered opening as they get ready for it. I was saying to, Michaela asked a really great question, because we were really excited when Pride announced it was coming to September, but obviously a lot needs to happen still for that to take place, and I think a big piece from trying to understand what, how lockdown ends with that roadmap is there will be pilots in April, which I personally haven't got sight of. So to Anna, again, great question. That's controlled by government, so we'll probably get told a bit later on if that includes London venues, which obviously it did last time with it was a Hilton in Canary Wharf and the Business Design Centre, so it all did amazing jobs and passed with flying colours. So I'm sure the same will happen again, given how they've organised it. So yeah, and I think it's fine, isn't it? I mean, I don't know, 6-8 months ago, there's enormous pressure on everyone, wasn't there, to know what the right answer is and what's going to be an accurate answer. And really, if we're very honest, right now we still don't know, because there's still things that can change. We've got the pilots in April, which will be hugely important. We're all aiming for that May date, and then hopefully June date, where we all go to the pub very, very late. But if vaccines continue at the rate is, and I think that again is a really good point for the UK, because you speak to our partners in Europe as well as North America. This is a really strong point of conversation. Of they're looking at the UK in a positive light, which is great, given the last sort of 2 years, because of the vaccine deployment. That is what's going to slowly build confidence, because what it all comes down to, and it's is safety, but then that individual decision on, do you want to jump on a train, go to an event, go to a shop, go to a restaurant? Do you feel comfortable doing that? And I think the decision for businesses to set up, organize events, again, those are big questions that they will have to involve, obviously, their teams, whether they feel comfortable doing it. So there's no magic sort of answer. There's no magic bullet.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. And I think if we start to look at the encouragement of events back to business events, I think consumer events will happen first. We've already booked. I've booked our local restaurant down the high street. We've already made 3 or 4 bookings in that first 2 weeks, just to be able to go out and have something to eat. We've been vaccinated. The government thing is, I think, is everybody over the age of 18 by the end of July, or is it June, will have been vaccinated or had the opportunity to be vaccinated, which is going to create a massive feeling of strength and goodwill that, okay, yes, we can now start to get out and do things. But the businesses will be slower. I mean, Mark Gill, thank you very much, has put a comment in that, Goldman, they have a strategic approach. They're looking at what they do. Mark led a discussion last week about all the different events that they are doing across their annual calendar and the way they're sort of looking at those events. But also businesses have seen a big benefit in, strangely enough, or big positives in going virtual, of being that, they've had greater reach in their audiences, where they might have had a conference for 100 people would have attended. They've had 3-4 times that attend online. So all of a sudden they think, oh, hang on, this is working. And so it is working. I think, as an industry, we've got to balance that and look at, okay, yes, there is positives for being online and being virtual, being hybrid and everything else, but what are the negatives? And I think what we've got to dig deep into is find out what those negatives are, and talk about that, the FOMO, the fear of missing out. You weren't at that event. What did you miss? And there is those conversations, that networking, that personal interaction, that whole feeling of being part of this community, and the things that you can pick up from that. It's really hard to pinpoint it, but I think it's you cannot beat a live event. We can look at it from a consumer point of view is, yeah, I can sit at home and watch the football on the telly. Great, or rugby in my case, but you can sit at home and watch. But you know what? You can't beat being there. And it's all of that experience. And that goes the same with business events.
It's funny, wasn't it, when before all this happened, the buzzword was experience economy, wasn't it? Both on individual as well as corporate as well as, you know, friendship circles. So I think a huge element will come, because that's what people have fundamentally missed the most, and that ability to come together. I think there will definitely be a big sentiment of that. But, you know, it's like I say, it's, you know, that confidence piece is so difficult to grow, because if you think back to like October, November, I think confidence was really building quite positively, and then bang, you know, things changed very quickly. So, you know, it's that horrible political term of cautious optimism, isn't it? But it's but I think that's us learning from the last 12 months. And I think, you know, I think Rhiannon touched on it as well. This whole hybrid messaging has absolutely changed enormously in the last 6 months, and what that means. But a really encouraging bit of, you know, encouraging much more virtual element to your events is that feeling of inclusivity, which, you know, which completely be embraced by organizations, all of us, you know. And I think that is a really good positive, can really play on where people have access to these events that they wouldn't necessarily have before, you know, if they can't travel. And I think, you know, again, the hybrid messaging will come in well with the sustainability piece as well, where some companies will have much more rigid policies in terms of what they are allowed to travel to. Now, it's obviously incumbent on us to say, well, you know, if you are going to travel to London, you know, to have a few meetings, then make sure you attend this conference and really make the most of that trip. And whilst you're here, here's some pointers to be a responsible visitor. But, you know, it is all kind of entwined in terms of, you know, it is kind of leading much more to this recovery regardless of COVID.
Yeah, I think the other side of that as well is that with the hybrid model, that, you know, if you can put an event on that, okay, in the past, again, would have been 100 people, say, and you had the sustainable impact of that event being 100 people. If you can now say, well, that event touched 500 people, the sustainable, it still had a sustainable impact, but it has diluted it through like what it's achieved. You know, it's achieved a lot more than it would have done with 100 people if it's been a hybrid and has touched 500 people. So from a business point of view, there's far greater reach and content and communication. And I think that's something. Funny enough, I was on a call yesterday with somebody we were discussing this at length, and we think that's kind of where the, you know, the next big opportunity for events are, is that, you know, I don't think hybrid and virtual, particularly from the supply chain, is something that we need to fear and worry about, because I think going forward, it will take time for all this to happen, is that events or engagement, I'm now saying, you know, engagement marketing is going to get much larger share of budgets overall, because your event and your hybrid and your casting and everything else can become the new marketing. So if you talk about, we look at sort of, you know, advertising as it was to where it's gone. So from analog to digital, everything is moving, analog to digital. You know, Google search, Google is, you know, the biggest advertising platform in the world now. Facebook, you know, this all moves from traditional style of advertising to online. Same with shopping. You know, we're all fearful about, you know, what's happening, but, you know, I'm sure everyone does 50%, if not more, of their shopping now online. So it changes the makeup of the whole sector. And I think the digitization of the events industry is something that needs to be embraced and not feared, because it is happening and it's not going to go away. And that's the key message that I keep sort of banging on to everybody. So it's okay, well, how do I do this? And I think, you know, hotels sort of saying, okay, we can connect our properties, we connect our venue spaces, we can do that. So you can have, you know, 50 people in Edinburgh at a meeting with 50 people in London at a meeting. It's a live event, but they're talking to one another from two destinations. There hasn't been that travel. There hasn't been that impact. And time, you know, it's time wasting, the productivity. That you know, that sort of touched on sort of a bit about the future of challenges. Guys, we've got a couple of more minutes before we start to wrap up. How do you see travel happening? I mean, do you see people, or you know, you bang the drum for London, rightfully so. You see that as a central hub, particularly sort of, well, UK, Europe? You know, do you think things are going to start UK before big international events coming in?
Definitely, yeah. Localized first, regional second, national, domestic third. Interestingly, with what we've received as a convention bureau from planners is that, you know, North America is still pretty robust. And, you know, it's important actually when you quantify that, right? So it's not as if it's 2019 or 2018 levels, but there's still that level of interest, which is strong. So that's been really good. Europe's much more challenging, I think, and that's in the context of obviously what's happening, but also Brexit, which, you know, will have had an impact. So, but yeah, China less so at the moment, and sort of Asia markets. Yeah, so I'd say, you know, good markets, of course, domestically, and it makes sense, doesn't it, recovery wise? And that's, you know, if you look at it very broadly, it's just purely because of people, be it different vaccines left. Will there be a passport in place or a form? Will there be different agreements between different countries, which, you know, it's probably likely there will be, you know, when you look at countries such as Greece and Spain and Portugal, and obviously they want tourism to open up this summer. Otherwise, you know, that they lose a huge amount of their GDP, you know. So, yeah, so, but yeah, domestic, regional, local, key focus. And that's a big part of how we've evolved actually as London Partners, from always being an international agency, so focusing purely on international business. We now have a clear domestic remit.
Okay. Guys, I'm going to bring it to a close. Thank you very, very much indeed. Thank you for your insights. It's so good to hear of all the work that you guys are doing, and how London is getting ready to return to live. The information about the venues, keep us updated on that, Paul, because the more info we can have for our members and share with our members is really important. Those are the questions people are asking about, you know, who is ready, who has done this, who's invested in their IT, bigger pipes, technologies and stuff we're going to need, you know, who is doing really good, you know, who's got accredited on the back to live, whatever it is, the accreditation on the health inspection, and venues that can connect with each other. So that's all good to know. Thank you very much. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Rhiannon, and thank you, Stijn. Great conversation.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks so much for having us.
And we will update any questions. Let us know, and we can go back to these guys and ask them to send that. Stijn, you're going to share that information with us, and we'll put that on our website and share that with our members.